Well, Crossroads Church, it's a delight to be with you today. I see so many dear friends. I'm glad, as Pastor Alvin said, to have my whole family here today, to have my wife Gloria and Liza, Nora, Judson, and Troy. We've been looking forward to this day, looking forward to this time of fellowship together, looking forward to talking with you afterwards, looking forward to joining you at Ibn Battuta afterwards as well for merienda. I like merienda. Is merienda just a meal without rice? Is that really what it is? Right? Because it's not a meal if you don't have rice. So we'll join you for a riceless snack or meal at Ibn Battuta for a merienda. I just wish there was halo there from Raisons. Is there a Raisons at Ibn Battuta? Does anybody know Raisons? Am I saying it right? Razons. Okay. I'll work on my accent because I don't want to miss out on the halo next time I'm there in the Philippines. Well, Redeemer Church of Dubai sends you their greetings. We prayed for you this morning. I prayed for you. I led us in prayer as we celebrated the baptisms that have happened here in the church and so many other things. Well, we just finished at Redeemer preaching through the book of Hosea. We enjoyed 8 weeks walking through that Old Testament book. We celebrated the finishing up of our second year cohort of the Gulf Training Center, and we're starting a new foundations year next year that we're thrilled about. We've received extensions from the government through the month of July to meet at the Marriott Hotel. We're thankful for that, and we continue to hope and pray that those will continue in the coming days. God has been gracious to us, and yet at the same time the recent months have been challenging. We miss you. We really miss you. I love Crossroads Church. I love each and every one of you. And when we sent you out earlier this year, a few months ago, it was evident and obvious to us that you were gone. Because what we did in sending you out was sending out an army of volunteers, an army of ministry leaders across town, and we noticed it. It's been a challenge for us to raise up volunteers, whether it's our kids ministry or connections or just disciplers, just people in the church serving. You were a backbone to our church. And we sent you out. And we sent out one of our elders, Pastor Alvin. As you know, Pastor Alvin is an incredible shepherd. He's an incredible preacher and leader. And he was shepherding and caring for so many in our church at Redeemer. And so it was a real loss. It hurt to send Pastor Alvin and Diane out and to send so many of you out. It hurt us. Sending you out hurt, both ministerially and personally. I miss seeing your faces every week. I miss giving you hugs. I miss celebrating regularly with you. But you know what? The fact that it hurt me and so many of us so much at Redeemer, the fact that it hurt actually encouraged me. It encourages me that it hurt so much. Why? Why does it encourage me that we suffered a little bit in sending you out? Well, it encourages me because it means that we sent out great leaders. It means we sent out members of our church who were focused on gospel ministry and were working hard and leading well. It meant that by God's grace, Crossroads was set up for success. And here you are. It was great to be with you at your covenanting service a few months ago. Now it's great to be here today. And it's been a joy to hear the great stories of what's happening, to hear about all the baptisms in these past month or two. Just thrilling to report on that again this morning. Just people publicly, many of you publicly proclaiming your faith in Jesus. I love hearing the excellent reports on the preaching here, not just from Pastor Alvin, but I loved hearing the reports of Dexter's outstanding sermon last Friday and how God is raising up men to preach here. I love looking through the bulletin and seeing Erickson Cruz preaching here as soon. I loved seeing a number of other members formerly of Redeemer who are coming up here to not only lead, but to preach God's word. I mean, that is unbelievably encouraging to me. I love hearing the reports of people leading. This is incredible. I just want you to know how proud I am of you and what a joy it is to see this church thrive. You're an answer to years of prayer. Alvin and I started praying for this 5 years ago, 6 years ago, as soon as we met, probably the first time over coffee, just dreaming about what could be. This is an answer to years of prayer, not just for Alvin and Diane and myself and Gloria, but so many others. And so we're proud of you, and we're thrilled to rejoice with you in God's work. And while there are stories of grace and triumph, I know it's not been easy. For Pastor Alvin and Diane, I know church planting has been rough. The anxiety that a church planter faces is extremely high. It's tough to explain, but there are anxiety-ridden moments and days and nights for a church planter and his family. I remember the first year of our church plant at Redeemer, every Thursday night, Gloria and I would have conflict. We'd have stress. I would be anxious. I had a tough time sleeping. And I know, talking to Pastor Alvin, many of those anxieties are also there because there's the caring for the saints in the church. And then there's just the normal hurting believers around you, just the logistics. There's the stress. There's the pressure. And so I know it's not been easy on them. I know the move to deck here, I know that wasn't part of the plan. I know Pastor Alvin and others weren't looking around the city trying to find the perfect location and thought to themselves, why? Let's move to the Dubai Evangelical Church Center. That's the perfect spot. No, that wasn't part of the plan. God's plans are better than our plans, though. But that wasn't part of the plan. That brought other difficulties and stress and renting buses and just figuring out how to get people here. I know many of you have gone through financial struggles. I know, talking to some of you, there are issues with your jobs. Some of you need a job. Some of you desperately need a job to provide for your family here and back home. Some of you are sick and hurting. And we at Redeemer have mourned with you at the passing of Abby. We've grieved with you. Chris, we love you, and we as a church have prayed for you. We have grieved with you at that loss. Much pain, much hurt. Crossroads Church, in those times of pain and hurt, where do you go? When you feel like there's no hope, who do you turn to? When the dark nights of the soul last far too long, what do? Psalm 46. That's what we know. That's what we do. The answer is in our psalm. This is the psalm that I first turned to on the night that I had a terrible accident in India a couple years ago. I was traveling there with Pastor Scott Zeller. We were there to teach a seminary course. And that particular day, our storytelling taxi driver was driving us all around town. He took us to the largest Sikh temple in the city on their day of worship. It was amazing to see their worship, and maybe even more interestingly, to see them make the community meal. They open up a meal for everybody in the community. I've never seen so many potatoes, so many cucumbers before in my life. They even had a big chapati bread machine there that would shoot out a chapati bread every second, just hot and ready to go. It was unbelievable, a food machine. It was like something out of a dream. And the only thing I could think more wonderful than that is a machine that would shoot out an amazing Aloha burger from Jollibee every second. You just go up and push it, and out comes a perfectly grilled burger. Now, I think that's going to happen in heaven, don't you? At the banqueting feast of heaven, right there, right to the side, there's just this amazing Aloha burger machine right there for all of us to enjoy together. Well, that same night, things changed in an instant. A few hours after the Sikh temple, Scott and I decided to jump into a taxi to go into the center of the city. We ran across the street. We dodged cars, auto rickshaws, motorcycles, bicycles, the occasional man with a wheelbarrow, even a renegade cow or two. We finally reached up towards the taxi, and as I was about to get into the taxi door, I fell into a hole. And the hole was about maybe 3/4 of a meter deep, and I fell into the hole and I fell forward onto my left hand and my right elbow. And the pain was excruciating. Now, for those of you that don't know, I have a degenerative nerve disorder in both of my arms, so one of the two main nerves doesn't work properly. I've had multiple surgeries, faced all kinds of therapies. I have burning pain 100% of the time, can hardly lift anything. My kids are so helpful to help me get outdoors and put on my seatbelt and even get dressed. Can't shake hands, can't do much that I'd like to do. It's painful, and the disability is quite humbling. But I had fallen a few times before, but never quite that bad, never directly on one of my elbows. And so the pain was set off, depression was set off. My worst nightmare had happened. There was no dinner that night. Instead, I went up and laid in my bed in despair, and all I could think about was how intensified the pain would be. Perhaps the pain was intensified so highly that it wouldn't ever disappear. Maybe my handicap was more permanently in a higher pain type way, was intensified forever and ever and ever, and perhaps would never subside. And I went into my bed depressed, discouraged, feeling hopeless, and I took out my Bible that night, barely wanting to look at it, but knowing I needed hope, knowing I needed God's help, and I turned, and the first place I turned to, really the only place I turned to that night, was Psalm 46. I turned there because I needed these words. We need these words. Here's the main point this morning. Psalm 46. The main point, I just have one, and it's the first verse of the psalm. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Right there in verse 1, we see the answer. We need this help because it's inevitable that trouble will come. The psalmist doesn't say God is our refuge and strength at the event that maybe you will go through a trial one day. Or God is our refuge just in case you meet someone who suffers. Well, trouble will come, and it will come to you in one way or another. D.A. Carson has said, if you live long enough, you will suffer. And in those moments of trouble, verses 2 and 3, even as the mountains in the earth, which seem to be the most solid things of all, the things you think would provide you security in those crazy, difficult trials of life, even the mountains in the earth will prove to be nothing. For all the science and technology we have, we can send rockets to the moon. I saw an article yesterday in the Gulf News that said next April, the first Emirati will be in space. For all that we can do technologically, when the high winds come, when the waves come, when the earthquakes roar, we have no answer. We have no power to change the weather, no power to change the doctor's diagnosis of an illness. And it's not just natural disasters, it's man-made disasters that trouble us. Later on in the psalm, we see that wars will continue, that countries will crumble. We're helpless. And the world is a dangerous place. It's unpredictable, and we're unprepared to face it on our own. So what do we do in these situations? Now, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Our refuge is a place of protection. Now, the idea of refuge would have reminded the Israelites of the cities of refuge that were in place. You can read about these cities later this evening in Numbers chapter 35. There were certain cities sprinkled throughout the nation of Israel that were designated as these cities of refuge. And in those days, we know that justice happened in an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth kind of way. You do something, you get that back done to you. If you hurt anybody, even by accident, you better watch out. In the cities of refuge, though, there was a touch of mercy. If a man killed somebody by accident, he could flee there. For instance, if you're working and the head of your axe flies off your axe and strikes someone between the eyes and kills them, the thing to immediately do was to run, to move as quickly as you could to a city of refuge. If you could get there, if you could open the door, if you could drag yourself in, if you could get slammed into the city, you were safe. You would spend the rest of your life in that city of refuge, but at least you were safe there. Well, the point is, when the earthquake comes and the storm is after you, or when discouragement engulfs you and war breaks in the front of your house or in the confines of your heart, don't fight it yourself. Don't ignore it. Head for the city of refuge and admit on your own you have no hope, and you head to God. Now, He's our protection. He's our strength. He's our help, our very present help. That means He's always ready. That means God's always on guard to help His children. There's never a time when God sleeps or God slumbers. He is alert. He is ready. He's on guard to help His children. Oh, Crossroads Church, do you go to Him? Do you run to Him? Do you turn to Him? Do you wait for Him? Or do you look to other things for security? Some of us feel safe when our bank account is at a certain level. Or maybe we feel fulfilled when we have that dream job we've been waiting for, or we finally have that family we want, or we have a nice boss, or there's an absence of conflict in our life, or maybe our health is doing well, or we take confidence in the medicine or the doctors that we have, or we take comfort in the school marks of our children and their future. Or maybe instead of embracing your circumstances or taking comfort in them, maybe you run, maybe you escape altogether, maybe you run and ignore your circumstances and you pretend as if everything is okay. Well, the psalmist doesn't escape reality. The psalmist calls it what it is. Yes, the mountains feel like they're trembling. It feels like the earth is giving way. The waters are raging and I can't hang on. Nowhere is safe. Well, friend, trouble will come. And placing our confidence in anything in this world, it's like standing in the middle of an empty field during an earthquake. There's nothing to hold on to, nothing to anchor yourself down on. But thankfully there is hope. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Our security is not found in anything else. It's not God plus money or God plus health or God plus a family or God plus a job or God plus anything. It is God alone, period. It's because of God we will not fear. Regardless of what's happening all around us, we have God's protective presence. Now, we don't know the historical setting of this psalm. The episode appears to fit well with the experience of Jerusalem during the invasion of a man named Sennacherib in 701 BC. This was a time that a vast army came and overwhelmed the southern kingdom of Judah, took its fortress cities, besieged Jerusalem. The Assyrian king taunted King Hezekiah. He said, look at what's happening. You're being defeated. Everything is caving in around you. Your God's no good. Our God's better than your God. You better turn away. My advice is surrender to me right now while you still have a chance. But the prophet Isaiah went to King Hezekiah and said, don't listen to that nonsense. Don't listen to Sennacherib. Go before the Lord and ask the Lord for help. Go before the Lord and say, Lord, if you don't defend us, we're going to die. And he did. And you know what God did? Well, God sent an angel of the Lord, and 185,000 Assyrians were destroyed in one night. And Sennacherib was so humiliated that his kids actually murdered him and tried to take over the throne. Oh, friends, God can deliver His people with His very word. He can deliver His people in an instant. I mean, look at verse 6. I love verse 6. It's my favorite verse in this psalm. The nations rage. The kingdoms totter. He utters His voice. God utters His voice, and the earth melts. I mean, you see that picture of how powerful God is. The nations may be raging, the kingdoms may be tottering, being unstable, there may be enemies approaching you, and yet God can utter his voice and the earth can melt. This is the all-powerful God. He holds the whole world in his hands. We might not know what tomorrow holds, but we know who holds tomorrow. And it's our almighty God. He's in complete and utter and sovereign control over all things. Daniel understood this and said that all the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" The Apostle Paul says in Colossians chapter 1, "For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together." Not some things, not a few things, not partial things, not a little bit, all. Every single thing God himself holds together. He really does hold the whole world in his hands. He is our sovereign ruler. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, and the earth melts. And here's the comforting thing. This God who can melt the earth with his voice is with us. Verse 7, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And he repeats that refrain in case we forgot it in verse 11. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. That word hosts is a military term. It means he is strong and he is Lord over all. His protective presence comforts us. It's described as a fortress. A fortress was an isolated, elevated place where people would build a stronghold against an enemy. It was a place of protection. And I love the picture of verses 4 and 5. Not only does God protect us, he says, "There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns." In the previous verses, the water was menacing. It was raging. It was dangerous. But here with God, when it's God's city, when God's in the midst of her, the waters are calm. It's the image of a life-giving river. Rather than destruction, this river offers life. It offers rejoicing. His presence is like a refreshing river flowing through the city. And it's often that a city will grow around its river. We see that in early pictures of Dubai. We call it the Dubai Creek, but if you look at old pictures of Dubai, you see that the city grows from Deira and Bur Dubai right along the creek, and it grows outward. It's because the creek or the river brings life. It brings wind, it brings food, it brings transportation. The psalmist is saying that God is in the midst of us, and that like a river bringing life, it brings gladness, joy, sustenance. Now, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. In verses 8 and 9, we have a call to behold God's work. It's a reminder that this powerful God who holds the world in his hands does a mighty and powerful work. He has the strength to stop wars, to destroy enemies. He breaks the bow. He shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. God is in control. The whole psalm is showing us this. But perhaps the most important part of the psalm is that it ends with a call to trust God. The whole psalm builds up to verse 10. And verse 10 is actually a command. It's in the imperative, and it's there in the imperative that we see God breaking through the scene in the first person. "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." This is not a suggestion or an encouragement. Verse 10 is a command. It has the force of a military commander. Cease, desist, stop. It has the imagery of calling all of your combatants, calling those under your military authority to listen up, to stop. It's not merely a shh, be quiet and quiet down. God is insisting, stop it. It has a great force that you can't really see in the English or Tagalog language. But it's not a suggestion. God's not suggesting, because of who I am, perhaps if you feel like it later, calm your heart and be still. It's not a suggestion. It's not a recommendation. It is a command. God is saying to us like a parent separating two fighting children, stop, pay attention, calm down, be still. And friends, we can do this not because out of any strength of our own. We can only do this because in the end, God will be exalted. God will be exalted in the nations. He'll be exalted in all the earth. He wins. We know the end of the story. We know the end of the book of Revelation. We know that God wins. We know that He will be exalted. There is no doubt. And so, friends, this command, verse 10, may be the exact words that you need to hear today. Be still and know that I am God. Maybe you need to hear that from God today. Maybe you need to be still and know that He is the God over not only the universe, but He is the God over your life. Personally, He is the God over you. I'll be honest, I find this command most difficult. In a sense, it's one thing to be commanded to love your neighbor. It's one thing to be commanded to watch your words. It's one thing to be commanded to not be angry or jealous. Those things are hard too. But I'll be honest, it's another thing to be commanded to be still and know He is God and actually listen and do that. Over the past month, I faced many challenges personally that have made me nervous and anxious. Now, I want to be still. I desperately want to be still before God, but it's hard. It's hard to be still. I've worried about my pain, our finances, our church, my kids, other hurting people. In fact, there were a couple nights in the last couple weeks that I couldn't sleep. Oh, friends, we all need this reminder, don't we? Jesus tells us in His famous sermon, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more important than food and the body more important than clothes? Now, Jesus says, don't worry, even if you're dying of hunger and thirst. That's pretty extreme. Most of us, we have clothes. Most of us will eat something. It might not be a filet mignon steak meal for merienda, but we'll eat something. We'll probably drink something. We'll probably go and have some kind of shelter later on today. What Jesus says there is, even if you have nothing, I'm going to take care of you. Even if you have nothing, don't worry, trust me. Even if the whole world disintegrates around you, do not fear. Friends, this is the point of the psalm. There will be trouble. But God offers us a protective presence. Our call is to trust Him, to be still and know that He is God. We must understand that even in the midst of utter chaos, God is with us. He is with us and He is for us. And the psalmist is not merely talking about confidence in the face of minor disturbances or even the losses of a loved one. As terrible as these may be, they pale in significance before the fearful prospect that the psalmist ultimately portrays. See, without God, we face something far more dangerous than anything this life can bring. There's a greater storm yet to come. For those that don't yet know Jesus, there is a greater storm yet to come, the storm of God's eternal judgment, where you will face the full wrath of God. That full wrath of God will flash out against all who sin. That day of judgment is coming. See, on our own, none of us can be exempt from this judgment. None of us can test out of it by saying that we have followed the 10 Commandments perfectly. All of us have sinned against a holy God, and we have a choice to make. To trust God or to not. To follow God or to not. Two ways to live, two ways to go, two directions that we can take. To go that wrong way, to go into the wrong direction, has catastrophic consequences. And I shared an illustration at Redeemer a few weeks ago that we see an illustration of this when we go out driving on the roads. Have you noticed that when you take a wrong turn at the Clock Tower roundabout, or you miss your exit on Sheikh Zayed Road and you take the wrong exit, that you are doomed? Have you realized that? Sometimes if you miss a certain exit and you are trying to go somewhere, you might as well just give up and go back home. You're never, ever going to get there. A wrong turn on the roads can be devastating, and it can certainly lead to arguments between husbands and wives. Let me tell you. Now, I haven't actually experienced them, but I've heard that some of you actually fight with one another when you get lost. Shame on you for that. I know who you are. A wrong turn can be devastating. But friend, there's no wrong turn more devastating than turning away from God, taking that other road. We need to stop blame shifting and excusing ourselves. See, to be honest, why do spouses get into arguments on the road when they're lost? It's because they're blaming each other. Of course, it's the driver's fault. Of course, it's the navigator's fault in the passenger seat. No, it's the fault of the noisy kids in the back who just won't quiet down. No, it's the fault of the city. If the signs were just labeled better and gave us more anticipation for the exit, would be okay. Or if the other drivers were just a little nicer, if they were as nice as I am on the roads, then I'd be okay. If only this, if only that. That's what we do with our sin. We blame our parents for our upbringing. If they hadn't done this, I wouldn't be broken. Or we blame our spouse. If our spouse would just love us better, if they would serve us better and respect us more, then I'd be more loving and less angry. Maybe you blame someone in your past who hurt you. Or you blame your circumstances or socioeconomic status. If only you had more money, then you could achieve success. Or you blame the church. Instead of owning your sin, you blame the church's reaction to your sin. Instead of owning your sin, you blame the pastor for how he responded. You start pointing out other people's faults. No, God is saying, take responsibility for your sin, and instead of blaming everything on what's broken in the world, own it. We need to realize what British author G.K. Chesterton once realized when a newspaper in London asked its readers to turn in an essay. And the one question that the essay was to respond to was, what's wrong with the world? That's the question, and you were to write in an essay and mail it to the newspaper. What's wrong with the world? Well, Chesterton famously replied with perhaps the shortest essay in history, just 2 words. I am. What's wrong with the world? I am. Sincerely yours, G.K. Chesterton. See, he got it. And friends, I say this in love, but you and your sin is the biggest problem in your life. Your sin is a bigger problem than anyone around you. And the first step in turning to the Lord is understanding that out of all the problems in your life, you are the common denominator. Oh, friend, our hearts are messed up. The reason we worship other gods, the reason we're mean to each other and manipulate one another, the reason we trust money and use people, the reason we worry and worry and worry, the reason anxiety keeps us up, it's not because of our culture, it's not because of our mom or dad, it's not because of our health, it's not because of the movies, it's not because of the church leaders, it's because we are sinful and fallen creatures who, instead of worshiping God, are looking to this world to give us comfort. This morning, this afternoon now, is a call to come to God. It's a personal call. Yes, you are a sinner, but God. But God, He loves you. Oh, friend, if you've never repented of your sin and turned to Christ for salvation, let today be the day of your salvation. Turn to Jesus in repentance and faith, and he gives you a relationship. God doesn't merely offer you perks and privileges. If you come to him, you don't get a card that gets you some kind of membership into a club. He gives you himself. He gives you a relationship with himself. And he did this by bridging the gap of our sin. Because Jesus, God in the flesh, came to this earth. He died on the cross, and he bridged that great divide. He died a sin-atoning death. He died the death that we deserved. And he went to the cross and faced that full wrath of God for us. It was the greatest exchange. He takes our sin, and he gives us forgiveness and his righteousness. He conquered sin. He died, rose from the grave. This is the good news that we call you to today. It's the good news that while there's nothing we can do to be saved on that judgment day, God provides a way. There are a lot of uncertainties in our lives. I don't know if the freedoms we have in this land will continue. I don't know if my health will ever be stabilized. I don't know if you'll have the happiness and joy you think you need tomorrow. But here's what I know for certain. That if you respond to this call to trust God and believe in him to save you and be your refuge, an eternity of joy awaits. If you're here and you're a follower of Christ, if you want to know how to have deep joy in your heart, this is how. Because if God is your treasure, your soul will never be empty. If God is your refuge, you will never be deserted. If God is your fortress, you will never be unprotected. If you're a believer in Jesus, we don't fear that judgment day. The earth may look like it's shaking all around us. The mountains may look like they're tumbling into the heart of the sea. Those around us may be hurting. We may be hurting. But if we're a follower of Jesus, and because of the cross of Christ, we have a fortress to withstand the storm. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. God is there in the midst of her, the holy habitation of the Most High. She shall not be moved. God will be with her when the morning dawns. Oh, friends, Crossroads Church, the nations may rage, the kingdoms may totter. He utters his voice, and the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And so, Crossroads Church, come and behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow. The same God shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. And so, friends, be still and know that he is God. He'll be exalted among the nations. He'll be exalted in all the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us, and the God of Jacob is our fortress.